Hey everyone, I'm Cheryl Fox and I work for Dr. Cybus. From time to time, I guest host a video here on his YouTube channel. So if you'd like to check out some of my other content, be sure to click on Carb Addiction Doc's playlists and look for me, Carb Addiction RD. My last two videos were also about milk, but today I want to focus on milk quality. I'll detail some of the interesting history of milk consumption, then review how we collect and process milk, and finally, I'll reveal how these methods affect the nutrition of our dairy supply. This is relevant as we anticipate potential upheavals in governmental health oversight. One example, of course, being potential accessibility to raw dairy products. Drinking non-human milk is an ancient practice. Many women historically died in childbirth, and others were unable to produce adequate supplies, and in certain times it was less fashionable to breastfeed. There have long been wet nurses available, but this was not always feasible, and some infants were fed animal milk instead. Archaeological evidence suggests that as far back as 30,000 years ago, antelope were confined and bred for their milk in the high Sinai Peninsula. Indian hymns from 4,000 years ago describe the consumption of milk and butter. The Sumerians between 5000 and 1800 BC were an advanced culture in what we now call Iraq, are known for developing a written language, but they also milked domesticated animals. Hippocrates around 400 BC described butter made north of Greece and recommended milk as a wonderful product. And the famous Roman physician Galen, alive between 129 and 216 AD, wrote of a man who lived 100 years on milk alone. Indeed, most people alive today in Europe, North and South America, and large parts of Africa and Asia are descendants of indigenous people who depended on raw milk as fermented products, as well as meat from pasture-fed animals. And many writers from cultures throughout the world and over the centuries have praised milk as a food that builds strong bodies and cures illness. Even today, milk is one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world, with about 811 million tons of milk produced globally in 2017. The milk cure was first introduced in 1857 by Dr. Inozemstev, followed by Dr. Philip Carroll in 1864. American physicians Dr. Donkin and Dr. Johnson in 1876 wrote of its effectiveness in The Lancet, claiming to have cured liver diseases, among other afflictions. It was recommended for many common chronic diseases by Professor Tyson in 1884 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, where he stated that milk should be used in the treatment of gastric ulcers, and no treatment for obesity is so effective as the milk diet. In 1905, Dr. Porter published Milk Diet as a Remedy for Chronic Disease. His treatment plan consisted of milk as the only source of nutrition for about 4 weeks, longer in some recalcitrant cases. He concluded that milk is full of living vital elements, so it is obvious that heat will have a serious detrimental effect on its value. He stated that boiled, sterilized, or pasteurized milk cannot be used for this treatment, rendering it unsuitable for human use. He found the cure to be effective against asthma, allergies, hay fever, hypertension, and diabetes. And even Dr. John Crew, a founder of the Mayo Clinic, wrote that 4 weeks on nothing but raw milk reversed most chronic disease. On the other hand, no one has ever claimed that pasteurized milk healed anything, and so the milk cure disappeared from the annals of medicine with the advent of pasteurization. In the founding years of a young America, many families had their own dairy cow with regular access to clean, fresh milk. But milk wasn't the only beverage Americans consumed. The War of 1812 with England severed the whiskey supply from the British West Indies, and soon every major city had distilleries. As the cities grew, available pasture land shrank, while the demand for milk and whiskey rapidly increased. Distillery owners began housing cows next to their distilleries, and the grain fermentation byproduct was fed to the cows. The cows were kept in unsanitary conditions and milked under similarly careless methods. This so-called slop milk was very profitable, but was an unnatural feed for cows, and their health suffered, as did the quality of their milk, which was low in fat and watery with a light blue color. Producers added annatto to improve its color and chalk to give it body. They also added water to increase the amount of milk they could sell and covered up the dilution by adding more chalk. And sometimes a little molasses was added to give the concoction the slightly sweeter flavor of fresh milk. By the 1840s, almost half the babies born in Manhattan were dying in infancy, mostly from cholera. This same sad statistic was repeated in every major city. There were many theories about the cause, but it was Robert Hartley who was the first to blame distillery dairies. In 1857, the Common Council of Brooklyn decided to investigate and issued a report that shocked New Yorkers. Not only was the milk of very poor quality, but the cows who produced it were very poorly cared for. In 1882, Robert Koch announced his famous postulate blaming germs as the cause of disease, leading physicians at the time to argue that pasteurization was the only way to make milk safe. Left unconsidered was that the water was not very clean either, due to a lack of sewers and ubiquitous horse and cow manure. These likely were at least partly responsible for the introduction of bacteria into the milk. Furthermore, rampant poverty and associated malnutrition likely played a role in childhood illness. One champion of pasteurization was Nathan Strauss, co-owner of Macy's department store. He had a powerful ally in one Dr. Jacoby, who was president of the American Medical Association. The charity work of Strauss to distribute pasteurized milk throughout the city happened to coincide with a dramatic decrease in infant and child mortality, which of course sealed the deal in the minds of many. However, during those same years, chlorination of water was initiated and automobile use increased. So that also reduced pollution from horse excrement in the streets and of course in the water sources. Under President Roosevelt in 1908, 20 government experts reported that raw milk posed a danger. The U.S. Surgeon General summed up their investigation with these words: "Pasteurization prevents much sickness and saves many lives." And they further stated as fact that pasteurization does not change the chemical composition, taste, digestibility, or nutritive qualities of milk. These facts have been repeated for over 100 years and persist in government and medical literature to this day. The FDA and the CDC continue to recommend drinking only pasteurized milk, which has been affirmed by leading health and medical groups, including the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics. This screenshot shows the current guidance from the CDC. It states that raw milk is milk that has not been pasteurized, a process that removes disease-causing germs by heating milk to a high enough temperature for a certain length of time. It's important to understand that raw milk can be a source of foodborne illness. While good practices on farms can reduce contamination, they cannot guarantee safety from harmful germs. Pasteurized milk offers the same nutritional benefits without the risks of raw milk consumption. Since the early 1900s, pasteurization has greatly reduced milk-borne illnesses. You can see that I've highlighted two words here. Pasteurization does not remove pathogens. If present, they are killed. So you will still be consuming bugs, just dead ones. They clearly state, as they have since the time of Roosevelt, that there is no degradation of nutrition from pasteurizing milk. I'll review these statements shortly. In 1907, Americans fought the proposal to make pasteurization mandatory and raw milk illegal. But by 1917, 46 major cities required pasteurization, and today it is difficult to get raw milk anywhere. In the processing plant, chilled raw milk is heated to 161 degrees Fahrenheit and held there for at least 15 seconds before it's quickly cooled back to its original temperature of 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Increasingly, modern milk is subject to the ultra-heat treatment, or UHT method, which heats milk to a temperature of about 230 degrees Fahrenheit, which is above the boiling point, for a fraction of a second. These treatments extend shelf life considerably and increase accessibility, but remove the consumer from the fresh product. A protein is a string of amino acids that fold into specific shapes, and enzymes are one type of protein. These folded shapes distinguish different enzymes, making them recognizable by our bodies for their specific purpose. Heat causes a loss of this structure, and thus of function, even if the sequence of amino acids is unchanged. So, pasteurization deactivates all of the enzymes in milk. A familiar example is a concept that you can't unfry an egg. The proteins have irreversibly changed shape. One example is the enzyme phosphatase. Its complete destruction is actually the lab test for a successful pasteurization. But we need large quantities of it for metabolic processes, and so we can make it endogenously, but by obtaining some of it from our food, we preserve the valuable resources for other purposes. Meat proteins are bundled into tight coils so they survive heat treatment. However, milk proteins are very fragile, and the heat of pasteurization distorts them so that the body no longer recognizes them, which could potentially cause the body to mount an immune response. The whey proteins are particularly susceptible, as are immunoglobulins, another type of protein that is essential to our immune system. When it comes to the effect of pasteurization on vitamins, there remains controversy. The official line is that there is little impact, and a meta-analysis in 2010 does indeed suggest very little impact on levels of vitamins B1, B2, and C, but decreases in vitamin B6 and folate. However, very detailed analyses previously found more serious degradations in vitamin content, as shown here. High-quality raw milk contains significant amounts of vitamin C, estimated at between 20 and 25 milligrams per liter. Vitamins and minerals are often bound to proteins to facilitate their absorption. Since pasteurization alters the shape of proteins, it also destroys their ability to bind folate, B12, zinc, and iron, and so these can no longer be absorbed from milk. Pasteurization reduces the availability of milk's mineral components like calcium, phosphorus, and iodine. For example, the protein lactoferrin in raw milk ensures the assimilation of iron, but it is destroyed by pasteurization, so iron can't be absorbed either. Health officials insist that pasteurized milk has the same level of nutrients as raw, and for many nutrients, this is technically correct. For example, the amount of calcium is the same. But the real issue, especially for growing children, is whether it's absorbed. And this is of particular concern for sterilized infant formula and its significant nutrition losses. Milk sugar is called lactose and consists of glucose bound to galactose. Heating converts some of that lactose to lactulose, where the glucose is converted to fructose. Lactulose content in commercial pasteurized milk samples typically ranges between 1.3 and 3.2 milligrams per 100 grams of milk. Now, lactulose is prescribed for constipation. While it's often stool, other side effects include bloating, gas, stomach pain, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. To be fair, the doses in milk are far lower than prescription strength, but it does make me wonder if this might partly explain why a number of people with lactose intolerance are able to drink raw milk. Animal testing with pasteurized milk versus raw milk is very revealing. In 1931, Dr. Scott and Professor Erf observed that rats fed raw milk showed good growth, sleek coats, clear eyes, and good quality blood, while those given pasteurized milk instead had slow growth, rough coats, anemia, and loss of vitality and weight. Famous experiments by Dr. Pottinger on cats between 1932 and 1942 found that those fed pasteurized milk were much less healthy than those fed raw milk. Additional rat studies in the late 1930s revealed that raw milk produced longer and denser bones. These showed that while the amount of calcium was the same between the different milks, it was utilized more effectively from the raw milk. In 1941, Woolson and Bars found that guinea pigs fed pasteurized milk had muscles streaked with calcification and calcium deposits under the skin and in the joints, heart, and other organs, a pathology not found in those fed raw milk. This suggests that when calcium is not incorporated into bone, it ends up in the soft tissues where it doesn't belong. Think about that when you interpret your CAC score and cardiovascular risk. But once again, further research went nowhere as pasteurization became the norm. Dr. Pottinger summed up the great paradox of pasteurized milk this way. Americans drink it by the gallon, believing that they are strengthening their bones, but in truth it does the opposite, as shown by animal experiments going back decades. Pasteurization increased the shelf life of milk, making delivery over longer distances possible. Next, homogenization became desirable because this solved the cream separation problem that occurred in transport. During homogenization, the fat particles are strained through tiny pores under great pressure, making them small enough to remain in suspension. Milk straight from the cow contains between 4 and 8% fat, but modern milk is standardized at 3.5% or less. Inside the milk processing plants, milk from the farms is remade. First, synthetic vitamin D is added. Then it is separated into fat, protein, and various other solids and liquids. Next, these are recombined to make whole, low-fat, and non-fat milks. The fat is replaced with skimmed milk powder, which has been found to contain the carcinogens nitrites and nitrates. When skim milk powder is produced using the direct heat spray drying protocol, nitrous oxide is created, which contaminates the resulting powder with the nitrites and nitrates. Although pasteurization itself is not responsible, the spray dry process produces oxidation of cholesterol in the powder, which then enters commercial milk in the remixing process. Oxidized cholesterol is believed to initiate the process of injury and pathological plaque buildup in the arteries. It's interesting to note that in animal studies, researchers typically use this oxidized cholesterol to induce atherosclerotic lesions rather than the undamaged cholesterol that occurs normally in food. Thus, the obedient consumer who drinks low-fat milk to avoid heart disease and cancer actually increases his intake of substances that cause heart disease and cancer. Intensive advertising campaigns have convinced most consumers to purchase reduced-fat milk. Equally sinister is the lobbying in the name of heart disease and obesity prevention that has led to the elimination of full-fat milk for growing children in school lunch programs. The so-called excess butter fat removed from milk in processing brings bigger profits to the dairy industry as an ingredient in ice cream than as a component in liquid milk. So the consumer has been cheated, but with homogenization, he doesn't even know. Despite the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations' stance on pasteurization, it's interesting to note that in their white paper that I discussed in a previous video, they report that when an animal is healthy, the microbiological quality of milk at the time of milking is generally good, and that milk from the udder contains very few bacteria, and the natural inhibitory systems in milk prevent a significant rise in microbial cell counts for the first 3 or 4 hours when kept at room temperature. They also note that the principal pathogens of concern in milk have now been largely or even entirely eliminated from the dairy herd in many countries. But of particular concern, the FAO report informs us that advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, are formed during heat processing of foods containing protein and carbohydrate, in other words, milk. Infant formulas are heated during the manufacturing process to ensure their microbiological safety for infants, but the consequence of this is AGE formation, and these are suspected of playing an important adverse role in atherosclerosis, diabetes, aging, and chronic renal failure. Finally, in confinement dairies throughout America today, cows are fed diets to maximize milk production, such as grains, soybeans, and even bakery waste. But these are not their natural foods, and aflatoxins can grow in grain feed. Levels in milk tend to be lower in summer when cows are put out to pasture to graze, but in confinement dairies, contamination can be year-round. Aflatoxins lead to liver disease and have become recognized as extremely potent liver carcinogens for both animals and humans. And, of course, pasteurization does not change the toxicity and carcinogenicity of aflatoxins. When I was chatting with my friend Angus McKinnon, a dairy farmer, he described the steps involved from a cow needing to be milked to the grocery store. Cleanliness and purity were a point of pride, and he was clear that the milk is immediately chilled, moved and stored in sterile conditions, and tested multiple times for contamination. He is confident that his milk is very healthy and nutritious in the raw state, and indeed that's the type of milk his family has been drinking on the farm for 8 generations now. Perhaps what we need to focus on is optimizing access to this quality milk for more people rather than trying to sterilize it. In the coming months, you may be able to impact government regulations to reverse mandatory pasteurization and homogenization of milk. Even if you don't drink milk, it has the potential for also improving the quality of the cheese and cream that maybe you do consume. At the very least, consider that this option should be made available to those who want it, which perhaps includes you after watching my videos. Thank you so much for listening.